1, ready.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm from a neighboring country. I come from the deep south, Belgium. Belgium was part of the Netherlands, as you all know, until 1830. And then we got our independence from the Netherlands much too early, of course. In the meantime, our country has developed. We have now 3 languages, 3 official languages, 5 governments and 6 parliaments. But a budgetary deficit that is lower than in the Netherlands. I remember a major speech delivered by your previous Minister President Balkenende when it came to Belgium, and he addressed a congress of my beloved political party. And he was underlining the differences between the Netherlands and Belgium. And he said the difference between Belgium and the Netherlands is extremely simple but striking. There's much more fun at the funerals in Belgium than at the weddings in the Netherlands. I hope that this is a confidential meeting and that it will not be on the headlines, in the headlines of the newspapers. In the meantime, we have to close this marvelous day. I was extremely impressed. I arrived only at about 7 o'clock, but I had the occasion to listen to most speakers of tonight. This is like the Olympic Games of creativity, originality, dedication, tolerance. I remember the council made by the guru of management, that's Professor Florida, and travels around the world and is preaching what he's calling the 3T model, 3 T's. The T of talent, that was shown here tonight. The T of technology, very sophisticated thing, and inventions. And the 3rd T is a bit surprising. It's indeed the T of tolerance. Listening to other people, solidarity, open-mindedness, and things like that. I come from a country where an extremist party is always saying, our people first. Our own people first. It's, from time to time, a message that's rather popular. But it's, of course, the wrong message. The message should be today, it's very, very, very warm here. I'm sorry. The message today should be not my people first, but all men first, all men and women first. And we heard the beautiful message of the former ambassador of Rwanda a few minutes ago. It was extremely impressive, striking. So at the end of 2012, I got the traditional phone call from a journalist asking me what was, according to you, the most important event of the closing year. And he thought probably that they would have been saying, well, the death of bin Laden, or the death of Gaddafi, or the tsunami in Japan, and so on, or the formation of the Belgian government after 535 days. I didn't say that. I said the most important event of 2012 took place in a small laboratory in San Diego, Florida. A Professor Joyce succeeded in something that never happened since man was wandering around in the world, he succeeded in creating a bacteria. And a bacteria is a living being. And he did it on the base of just material, chemical components. So that was a fabulous breakthrough. Man succeeded in creating life, elementary life for the time being. Very simple, even more simple than a cell, but in any case a bacteria. So this is wonderful. Indeed, reality is much stronger than science fiction. And now I was asked to address you and try to draw some conclusions of this marvelous day. So I was also asked to lecture, that's why this impressive device was built here on the rostrum. I was asked to make what the Dutch call een lezing, and that will last for at least 2 hours. Dear friends, the thesis I would like to defend is that what we call the crisis, and crisis is not necessarily a catastrophe. It's maybe a challenge, but that the crisis represents probably the birth of a new world, community. A new world I like to call Globalistan. Sounds good, like Afghanistan, Pakistan, and so on. But many problems. But of course the pregnancy could still end in a stillbirth if we behave in an irresponsible way. Under the Ancien regime, and we had here our French friend, he knows what it is, to make revolutions and kill kings. Under the Ancien regime, changes were so slow that no one noticed them. But today, changes are so fast that few people perceive them or are able to assess their consequences. We are too often entering the future backwards while looking in the rear view mirror. Fundamentally, what is happening since a few decades is a revolution. And I'm a strong believer in a history being steered and oriented by science and by its applications. Well, the major event, of course, is the ICT revolution, information and communication technologies, and the emergence of the society of knowledge and the economy of knowledge and information. Historians used to divide world history into 2 parts, before Christ and after Christ, BC and AC, but today that means before computer and after computer, of course. And that's reality. A global village is emerging, that's right. But the governance of the village, of the global village, remains too provincial, too local. And that's inter alia the big problem of the European Union. But also, I think, in the rest of the world. National governments are too small for the big challenges and too big for the small ones. And there's a yawning asymmetry between the global aspect of the world economy and the local character of the conduct of policy via national states. The consequences of the ICT revolution are indeed revolutionary. And I have to stick to a few essential elements. I would like to try to convince you that due to the ICT revolution, the great ideologies that dominated the 19th and 20th century, collective socialism and communism on the one hand and liberal capitalism on the other hand, are completely obsolete and dying and even dead. explain myself in a very short way because I used to teach that to my students during one semester. First, collective socialism and communism, based on the Marxist doctrine. The Communist Manifesto that was written by Marx in a cafe at the Grand Place next to the town hall in Brussels in 1848, where Marx said that in order to liberate the workers, one should nationalize, collectivize the factors of production, the plants, the machines, the raw materials. Today, the most important factor of production is knowledge, innovation, imagination. Not only IQ, but also EQ, a combination of both. But these elements, these factors of production of today in a digital society are immaterial ones. They are virtual and digital, so they cannot be collectivized. They cannot be transformed into what Marx called Volkseigentum, property of the people. No, that's impossible. So what we are attending now is a process of de-collectivization. De-collectivization, and that's a profound cause of the collapse of communism. There was, of course, the collapse of the wall of Berlin. That was an epiphenomenon. But fundamentally, it's due to ICT and its consequences that communism can no longer be a solution for our economic and social problems. Exit communism and collectivist socialism. On the other hand, there is also a process not only of de-collectivization, but also of de-privatization. Due to ICT, computer, and all its applications, the tablets, and the ads, and the apps, and so on, and so on, every idea, every invention is immediately spread throughout the planet. So private property, and particularly private intellectual property and industrial property, has become more and more theoretical, inexisting. According to some statistics, at least 20% of production in some sectors is due to counterfeit, fake, copy, particularly in Asia. Copyright, for instance, take the pharmaceutical industry, which is an industry where research is extremely expensive. They put, of course, copyright on the pathology. And then they hear 3 months later that their drug is copied in China or in Vietnam or in the Philippines. Well, copyright in Chinese, translated through the computer, sounds like ching chong chong chong. And then you ask the Chinese ambassador in Brussels or in The Hague or in Beijing to retranslate ching chong 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 into English, and then it becomes the right to copy. And that is what's happening. They copy everything and they think they are right to do that. And I must say, there was a congress in Washington, a very important congress 2 years ago on industrial property and intellectual property. And the conclusion of the congress was that indeed, if you invent something important, you have a brilliant idea, you write an immortal verse in a beautiful poem, that should be immediately the property of whole mankind. That's very, 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 I must say, this extremely generous to say that. But of course, the economic consequences are absolutely catastrophic in terms of investment and in terms of profitability of investment. But this indeed is undermining liberal capitalism. But the main reason for the undermining of liberal capitalism is, of course, the present crisis. And that crisis is a consequence of the fact that, thanks to ICT, the world economy has been united in a very, very short period. So, world economy has been dominated by world markets. And in these markets, the actors are not small companies, but very big companies. And the competition has become what economists call oligopolistic. No monopolies, but oligopolies. 5, 10, 15 major players in all branches. So the competition among these gigantic companies is extremely rude and mortal. Americans call it the cut-the-throat over competition. And this is incompatible with the theory of fair competition of the textbooks of economy. And is also incompatible, in fact, with, let's say, fair liberal market economy. And because of these mergers and acquisitions and all these concentrations on the world markets, all these big companies were in high need of financing their investments. So they need also in their back big banks and big investing companies. So we attended also a high concentration of the financial sector. And they had to compete also on the markets, on the financial markets. And to do that, they invented lots of new financial products. And they had strokes of genius, wonderful, sophisticated financial products. Short selling, naked selling, derivatives, CDOs, CDS. $70,000 billion of new financial products in 10 years. Today, we call them toxic products. Because they were excellent, indeed. Some were a bit too risky. And then applied the domino theory. And the whole banking system collapsed. And then the governments had to intervene. They had to finance the banking system by thousands and thousands of billions of euro and dollars. And that explains, of course, the explosion of public debt. And today, we are in a crisis of sovereign debt. And that sovereign debt crisis now is also causing a very difficult and huge economic crisis. Since at least 1 year, my feeling is that the European Union and our institutions, also the European Council, headed by Belgium, Mr. Van Rompuy, they do their best. They avoided the collapse of the monetary union up until now. Mr. Draghi has pointed his bazooka on the financial markets, and that's a good thing, but my feeling is that the present policy is too unilaterally concentrated on austerity and budgetary restrictions. Because by doing so, of course, your growth becomes zero and negative. And in a shrinking economy, it is impossible to reduce your public debt. Moreover, in the countries of Southern Europe, the possibility, the sustainability of the social suffering it has been exceeded. In countries like Spain, Portugal, Greece, you have 30–40% of young people that are unemployed. And don't forget, dear friends, that in these countries of the south of Europe, in general, these countries are extremely sympathetic and attractive. Democracy is a cyclical movement. During the 20th century, in a country like Greece, 3 times there was dictatorship. Metaxas, Papagos, and the colonels. And in Portugal, Salazar. And in Spain, Franco. And in Italy, Mussolini, and so on and so on. So enough is enough. I'm advocating since many, many months the need for a 2-track policy. And the second track being a huge European New Deal of investments in infrastructure, research and development, in renewable energy, protection of the environment, aging of the population, integration of immigrants, and so on, and so on, and so on. But you are saying, well, there's no money to do that. Of course there is money. I'm not a great defensor of printing money. I understand the policy of the European Central Bank, and I understand even the attitude of the Germans. We have to be extremely careful when by creating money, we would also create a huge inflation. But savings are very important in Europe. Thousands and thousands of billions of money is just saved on saving accounts. Keynes called that the liquidity trap. Well, my proposal is that that ESM, the European Stability Mechanism, would be transformed into a bank, would operate on the markets with the guarantee of the European Monetary Union, and could collect immediately between 2,000 and 3,000 billion euro. And that money should be given to the European Commission, not to the governments. Of course, the governments are very serious, they play politics with money. But to the European Commission. And that Commission should then indeed invest that money in projects, project by project. That would give hope to many people in Europe, and that would also, I think, promote economic growth. But I have to be short to conclude. Changes are overwhelming us. Scientifically, technologically, also philosophically. In all kinds of domains, the world is fundamentally changing. Politicians are always claiming change. Obama, and Cameron, and Hollande, and so on, and so on. And I'm not going to mention Belgian politicians. But claiming change, it's extremely trivial. Of course, everything is changing. What we need is not in the first place change. What we need is improvement. Only those changes that improve human condition of living, la condition humaine, that's what we need. So we have to promote these changes that are good for humanity. We have to improve those changes that are imperfect, and a lot of changes are imperfect. And we have to fight changes that are harmful for the future of humanity. And a few of changes are indeed extremely dangerous. So we have to be at the same time progressive and conservative, and put on the agenda the fundamental moral and ethical question of making a distinction between good and evil. That's a very old question. So I am defending the need of an ethics of change, what according to me is much more important than a change of ethics. That is what we need. That's a nice principle, and in fact you should applaud, but you don't do it because you are right. By having said that, you only raise lots of other questions. Who is going to decide on the content of ethics of change? The government? The parliament? The United Nations? You? Your conscience? What is the right answer? And how to decide? By majority? By qualified majority? By unanimity? And so on and so on. These are fundamental philosophical questions. The great philosopher Immanuel Kant had an answer. He said, well, it's the categoric imperative. And in fact, it has to do with the compass in our conscience. But in any case, all these questions should be put on the agenda. I've been in Parliament, Belgian Parliament, for 26 years, and I've been 10 years in the Council of Europe. Never these questions were raised by my colleagues. Although these questions are absolutely essential. The ethics of change. Perhaps it has also to do with our view on the world, our vision on man, and our concept of God. But you're not going to end this day by theology, although it's indeed a very fascinating and very important question. So I'm going to end to conclude. The future is mystery. The past is memory. Today is an opportunity to make the world better. That's why we call it a present, the present. And that was it here, particularly this day, was a great, great present. I thank you for that, and I congratulate you. May I finally propose a last reflection to your wisdom? It's a poem, a very short poem I discovered in the writings of a soldier that was fighting during the First World War on the front in Flanders. And the poem goes as follows. You do not choose your battlefield. The gods do that for you. But you can plant a standard where before a standard never stood. You have planted many standards here. Today, I hope also tomorrow you will continue. Thank you very much.